This all started as a personal research project in 1989. So that began several years of research in the archives of the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which has a huge collection of photos related to this project, the Copper River Northwestern Railway and Kennecott Copper. About '94, I decided that I'd like to try my hand at building some historic models. One of the things I noticed in going through the photos, there's a lot of buildings missing. It occurred to me that most people wouldn't even know these buildings ever existed unless there was, either they could see the photos, which was unlikely, or they could see models of them. I decided to go with the models. Some old fellow gave me this Bachmann locomotive, and I looked at that thing. I think a lot of people got started that way. But it very much resembled some of the rolling stock that the Copper River Northwestern had. So I looked at that and well, this is the answer. This is the perfect scale builder. I consulted with somebody who was a real dioramist up in Fairbanks, where I was living at the time, and he said, well, that's roughly 1:24 scale, and he showed me how easy it was to do drawings in that scale to convert them into the builder. The first drawing was actually of the trestle that you see inside the Gillahina, center section of Gillahina trestle. And I worked with somebody else at that time. We built the Hotel Ahtna that's inside, and then several smaller structures. And then I just kind of worked out from there. About '95, I decided that I needed a place to display the project. I began looking around and I came up with this location here, which is the Bard Copper Center, 256 miles south of Fairbanks, where I lived at the time. So I bought this. I had a plan drawn out for an overhead model railroad inside the bar that incorporated what I had built so far and a little bit more. And that seemed fine at the time. And I more or less followed the plan. I still got a copy of it. But it clearly wasn't enough. So a few years later, I came up with a scheme to build a building to house just the Kennecott model part of it, which is the building behind me. That structure is 36 feet long and 20 feet deep. And that's what it took, compressing everything as much as I could to display just the Kennecott part of it. So in May of 2001, we had a dedication ceremony here for the Kennecott model with some kids that had actually grown up in Kennecott came here to speak. A fellow who had worked on the railroad its last 10 years was here to speak. And authors of a couple of books related to Kennecott came here to speak. We had a crowd of an estimated 400 people here for dedication. It was quite a celebration. So the thing has advanced since. By the time I got dedication, I was already in the process of writing a book that goes along with this, a historic novel that revolves around my great-grandfather, well, great-great-grandfather, was a fellow named Nicolai. He was the one that revealed the original source of copper that started the whole copper mining process in Alaska. And it was the discovery of that copper lode which led to the discovery of the adjacent Bonanza lode, which brought in Guggenheims. They formed the original Kennecott Corporation. There it goes. So I guess you could say that my great-great-grandfather was directly attributable to the early beginnings of Kennecott, which ultimately led to the model that you see here. And at the same time, as I said, I began writing a historic novel which explains the relationship of Native American people, the Ahtnas up here, to the railroad, which came into our country in Ahtna in 1910 and lasted until 1938 when the railroad was finally pulled out with the exhausting of the copper ore at Kennecott. When I started this project, I had no idea what anybody else was doing, and so I drew it all up from scratch and just put it together based on the historic records that I had and what little I could get that told me about how to put together large-scale railroads. So nothing here is based on what anybody else has done. It's all original, and it was, as I built it, I discovered things that I needed to do. For instance, you get out here and you realize everything is close to 12 feet above the ground. So that ultimately necessitated the catwalk, and then the canopy overhead to protect these buildings, and all this walkway here, so you can readily move around and see the whole thing and get close to it.
Well, you're almost set up to be able to do the interior of the mine with little tramming operations.
Yeah, I actually consider doing that. But I have to put a great deal of thought as to how I present something like that. That's a very, very big project. I'm Alaska's expert on that too. I actually went to court and testified about how the mine was laid out because there was a court case on it. So I explained to them the historical relationship of the mine, where the tunnels were, where the exits were.
Oh, it's been fascinating for me to come out and see this. I read the book on the way up and went to your website.
Did you read the whole book?
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think?
I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it'd be more railroad oriented. I wasn't ready for the full perspective you offered. It's more from the social perspective.
The railroad is definitely there, though. It plays a major role in it.
Right. Right. But yeah, you didn't mention how many thousands of pounds of tractive effort the locomotives put out, or what the operating pressure the boilers were, or a lot of the usual things that a railroad foamer would want to see. So it was more from the social perspective of, here's the native people up here, and a couple whites come in and say, hey, do you know where the copper is? And your great-grandfather told them up there, kind of thing. And didn't think much of it at the time, and then there's just influx of Europeans came in with all their habits and tools and whiskey. And
there was no stopping it. That was just a human tidal wave, and that just what really changed everything.
I imagine Nicolai had no idea there were that many people in the world based living up here in this small tribal culture.
No, Lieutenant Allen estimated when he came up there was 300 Ahtna people in the whole valley, and in comes 3,000 people. Practically boom. And you can imagine what that did.
Right.
And an endless procession of railroad cars coming and people coming and all the stuff that goes with that for years and years and years. Material coming in, the copper going out, the social attitudes that were so different from Native American attitudes.
Right, telling them you can't hunt here anymore.
Worse than that, you can't speak your own language anymore in the schools. That sort of thing. There was a lot of that. So, of course, that was, and the railroad is what brought that in. This is the one place where the cavalry had little to do with anything, and a multitude of small prospectors and smaller mining concerns that all came through, just overwhelmed everything. That's what it was.
Right, and it was a lifestyle that lasted as long as the railroad, and as soon as it shut down in '38, that lifestyle basically collapsed.
Oh yeah, yeah. It built a civilization right here that in some ways has never been equal. Because they brought everything with them, and we don't. Especially you got McCarthy, a lot of stuff isn't there yet. So the railroad changed everything in just a very, very short order. Even the original white guys that came in, it was no longer their kind of world because they were into trapping and the rough life, and the railroad pushed all that back because it brought in civilization, which is not what the trappers wanted.
Right.
And fur hunters and all that. They didn't want that. The book details that. I don't know that there's any other book that's been written quite like that one either. I'm fairly sure not. I don't know a Native American contact book of that kind. It goes into that much detail on the operation of the mines. All those things that you wouldn't ordinarily think of as being related to Native people. But it's all in one, in reality.